Hi all, this is a brief review for Anatomy and Physiology 2, Test 2, specifically that dealing with the lymphatic system, the immune system, and the respiratory system. My review, as I have written down here in front of me, is sort of scattered about, so we're going to try and keep this thing in line in terms of our chapters as best as we can, but if I jump around just a little bit, that's life. Alright, so let's begin. First things first, the lymphatic system. Were I would have a really good grasp of the functions of the lymphatic system. You know, what is lymph? Tell me about the fluids that are taken up with the lymphatic system. Tell me about how the lymphatic system deals with fats. Tell me about how the lymphatic system is involved with lacteals in the intestines. Tell me about how the lymphatic system is involved in your immune system and sort of how your lymphatic vessels are all organized and fluid moves from your tissues to larger and larger vessels and back to the heart and how it's tested along the way for potential pathogens. Tell me what's special about your lymphatic vessels of various types, you know, like lymphatic capillaries. Tell me about how they do what they do. What is their physical setup? What are they for? How do they function? Tell me about lymph nodes. The functions of lymph nodes. What cells are found there? Where are your lymph nodes? Tell me about afferent inputs versus, well, that's incorrect. Tell me about afferent versus efferent tubules as they move through those lymph nodes. Tell me about the locations of lymph nodes, like cervical lymph nodes, axillary lymph nodes, where you would find these, what they drain, and what it might mean if they're inflamed in given areas of the body. That's very, very important, especially if you're moving into some sort of medical field. Tell me about how something like histamine, as an example, can influence your lymphatic vessels, like their little mini valves and all that fun stuff. Like, I want to know about those capillaries, man. They are important. Tell me about malt and materials like Peyer's patches and where you find them, tonsils and where you find them, why you have tonsils, why you have Peyer's patches, why your appendix is set up in the way that it's set up. Tell me about your spleen. What is red pulp? What is white pulp? What's it for? Generally speaking, what is your spleen for overall? Tell me about inflammations within the lymphatic system itself. Again, what are swollen lymph nodes? What does that tell you? If you were to have an infection and see striping of the lymphatic system underneath the skin, what does that tell you? And what do you call that? Like, is that a problem, or is it not really a problem? All right. Moving on a little bit into the immune system. So, I spoke in detail about first, second, and third lines of defense, as it were, in the immune system. So, be able to tell me a lot about your surface barriers of various formats. Like, your skin is a wonderful barrier, first line of defense. The lysozyme in your eyes, the acidity in your stomach, your mucous membranes, all of that. Tell me all about that first line of defense, as it were, and sort of how it works in terms of those surface barriers. Tell me about the second line of defense in your system, being your, generally speaking, your immune cells and sort of which ones do what. Like, what are neutrophils and what might they differentiate into? What are natural killer cells, for that matter? Tell me about these cells that are found there and sort of how they work. And involved in this, tell me about, you know, histamine and inflammation in that second line of defense. Like, I want to know all about inflammation. I want to know all about having a fever and what a fever might do. Like, generally speaking, you can kind of think of like minor inflammation in certain areas of the body as like a small-scale fever, and a fever as being a much more broad-scale body-wide event. Tell me about the ups and downs of this. Tell me about what is good about having a fever and why that matters for us. And generally speaking, tell me what's good and bad about all of our defensive mechanisms. So your surface barriers, what's good about them, what's bad about them. Your second line of defense, your immune cells that are there, as examples. Tell me about what's good about having those and what perhaps they're not as good at. Tell me about the third line of defense, your adaptive immune system. So specifically humoral immunity as well. But in and of this, tell me how it works, you know, why it's good, why it's bad. Like tell me how these things function and how they're set up. And for that matter, you should probably be able to tell me at length about viruses and bacteria and getting vaccinations and how this all works with your adaptive immune system. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very important. All right, let me just look through my list here. I've just sort of been talking. All right, are all microbes bad in the world around us, or are some of them helpful? We spoke at length about this. Give me some examples of some of the nastier microbes that we discussed and some of those that are beneficial for us. So we talked about all of this. What is opsonization and what is complement? All right, and how do these two sort of interact? So in the world of complement, there's a lot happening. And I want to know a little bit about how it all fits together. You know, what does all this do? Like, how does it fit? Let's see what else I've got for you. What's an acid mantle? Yeah. Natural killer cells, I believe we talked about. Monocytes, yeah. In terms of your specific defenses, I want to know all about T and B lymphocytes. Tell me all about antibodies. Tell me all about antigens. Like, I want to know, man. This is important. In reference to T and B cells, tell me about where they originally develop or arise and where they go to prove their immunocompetencies, if you will. So where do they do all their finalized development? In and of this, thunder outside. In and of this, tell me all about antigens and antibodies and major histocompatibility, or MHCs. Like, I want to know about it, you know? Like how does all this fit, again, with vaccinations? What are B cells? What are T cells? What are antibodies from plasma cells? Like, I want to know all about it. In terms of major histocompatibility, or again, MHCs, tell me about organ transplants. You know, what are autografts? Man, can y'all hear that thunder? What are autografts? What are allografts? Like, I want to know all about it. Tell me about how antigens trigger immune reactions. Tell me about antigen-presenting cells and what they do for your immune system. And for that matter, tell me about sort of one of the flip sides of this. Tell me what allergic reactions are. What is an allergic reaction? Are these things that could really hurt you, or is something else going on here indeed? Yeah, indeed. So be able to use terms like what is a pyrogen in reference to fever and the effects of fever. What is interferon, and how does this interact with virally infected cells and sort of what they do? Yeah, indeed. So just a good general breakdown of the immune system and its parts and pieces. And then last but not least, we have the respiratory system. First things first. If I were you, I would be able to tell me all about the upper respiratory tract versus the lower respiratory tract. So walk me through your like nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx. Tell me about the tissues that are there. You know, is this simple squamous epithelium? Is this tissue ciliated? Like, give me some details. Tell me about the larynx. Tell me about your trachea. Tell me about the entry into all this at the epiglottis and what the epiglottis is for. You know, it's that unique, what do you call it? Elastic cartilage versus the rest of the tracheal passages, which are all reinforced with hyaline cartilage. And in those hyaline cartilage reinforcements, tell me about, you know, the shape of the C-rings, basically, that are there, and why they are shaped that way. Tell me about the structuring of your larynx being made out of cartilage. I feel like that's an important nuance to this. Moving on, so tell me about alveolar gas exchange. So as we breathe, as we move down the trachea, into the lungs themselves, moving through down into the alveoli. Tell me about the exchange of gases between the alveoli, through the alveolar walls, through the capillary walls, and into the bloodstream. So how does your blood carry oxygen? All right, tell me about hemoglobin. How does your blood carry carbon dioxide? Tell me about bicarbonate. Tell me about the enzyme responsible for helping us sequester carbon dioxide in this fashion. Just walk me through the basic process. Now, moving back up into the tracheal passages, tell me about your mucociliary escalator. Tell me about the role of cilia, the role of mucus, in helping us maintain a clean respiratory system. This is very meaningful. Yes, indeed. Tell me about how you control your respiratory system. So what is the role of the medulla oblongata here? What is the role of the pons here? Tell me about chemoreceptors and pH and how this plays a role in our breathing apparatus itself. Let's see. Tell me about breathing volume. So what is like inspiratory reserve volume? What's vital capacity? Tell me about all of these. And we'll probably mention some problems associated with the respiratory system as well. So tell me about some of the major upper and lower respiratory disorders. Like having a grasp of something like tuberculosis is a meaningful thing. Like these are things you should be able to recognize going into a medical field. Tell me about lung cancer and how it's caused and the fact that it's so deadly, all right, incredibly deadly. Tell me about carbon monoxide poisoning and why carbon monoxide might be a problem. And again, just generally explain the concept of the respiratory system and how we diffuse gases in and out. And I'm going to really harp on one more thing before we move on, and that is that you really need to be able to walk me through a adaptive immune response. All right, really need to be able to walk me through it. I want to know all about T cells. I want to know all about B cells. I want to know all about memory. I want to know all about antibodies and the antigens. Like, I need to know how a vaccine would interplay with all this. So you need to be able to walk me through that immune response in detail, and that will be very, very helpful for you. All right, so that should be about enough. So I hope you guys do outstandingly well, and good luck.